Well, folks, we'll get to the gigantic media news that Jimmy Kimmel's show is basically cooked. We'll get to why that happened, what the government's involvement was or was not in that. I want to begin, as we've begun every day since the murder of my friend Charlie Kirk, with some tribute to Charlie Kirk, because I think it is important to remember the uplifting, remember the legacy, before we get to, the depressing and upsetting. So Glenn Beck, my friend, hosted Charlie Kirk's show yesterday. Obviously, the vice president of the United States had the privilege of hosting Charlie's show on Monday. And then the Daily Wire crew, Matt Walsh, Michael Moles, and I hosted Charlie's show on Tuesday. Glenn hosted Charlie's show yesterday. And he did something that I thought was pretty amazing. He brought along the EIB microphone, the Excellence in Broadcasting microphone that Rush Limbaugh used during his days. And he gave it to TPUSA. He put it on the desk in front of Charlie's chair, paying tribute to Charlie. Here was Glenn yesterday.
I brought something with me today that I thought was appropriate while I did the show, that I would sit in front of Charlie's microphone. It was given to me after the death of Rush Limbaugh by his wife. It is Rush's golden microphone. I think it's appropriate that it sits in front of Charlie's microphone.
Very generous gesture by Glenn, obviously. The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, is on Fox News last night with Jesse Waters talking about Charlie in a bit of a town hall. And here he was praising Charlie Kirk, his friend.
I don't want anybody to remember Charlie Kirk and that 5 seconds at the end of his life. I want him to remember Charlie Kirk, the skilled debater. I want him to remember those videos, those incredible videos of him and his wife and his babies and how much he loved Erica and how much he loved those kids. I want him to remember Charlie for that. I want him to remember Charlie for the guy for when it was these kids behind me. Now, I hate to call you guys kids, but you are, who would, a progressive would step up to the microphone at a Turning Points USA event. And some of the audience would jeer and cheer, and Charlie would say, no, let him speak, because he so desperately believed in this idea that we should be talking with and debating one another. So maybe see the video to understand what the far left did to Charlie Kirk, absolutely. But that should be one fraction of 1% of your memory of Charlie Kirk. 99.9% of it should be a titan of the conservative movement, a beloved friend, and a dear husband and father.
JD went on to talk about the fact that there are a lot of people who have been celebrating Charlie's death. That continues today. Schmucks like Keith Olbermann doing that routine, talking about Charlie burning in hell and all the rest. JD Vance said, consequences from civil society are a thing. Now, again, I've been saying for a very, very long time that the kind of low pixelation version of the cancel culture argument is a very stupid argument. That argument is morally relativistic, which is there should never be any consequences for any speech of any kind. That, of course, is unbelievably silly. No one has an obligation to pay you to say dumb crap. No one has an obligation to keep you employed if you celebrate the death of a political commentator with whom you had disagreements. Nobody has that obligation. The original argument against cancel culture is that it has extended so far that the left was canceling people for saying men are not women, for example, or pointing out basic statistics about crime. These were cancelable offenses. That if you were a person working at Google, like James Damore, and you made the point that perhaps women weren't going into the STEM fields at the same rate as men for reasons of both proclivity as well as distributional attributes on test scores. If you made that point, you got canceled. And the point the right made is that's crazy. These are all normie political discussions that we all have all the time. You can't get canceled for that. But if you were making the argument there should never be any consequences from society of any kind for taking positions and saying things that are truly egregious, that's a really stupid argument. And this is the point the vice president is making.
The First Amendment protects a lot of very ugly speech, but if you celebrate Charlie Kirk's death, you should not be protected from being fired for being a disgusting person. If you're a university professor who benefits from American tax dollars, you should not be celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. And if you are, maybe you should lose your job or your university should face a loss of funding. If you are the kind of person who thinks that Charlie Kirk was justifiably murdered. Sometimes the government can't do anything about that, but you know what can is civil society. And I've actually been gratified to see all these people standing up and saying, yes, we have free speech, and yes, we have free debate, but if you're celebrating the death of a young father, you ought to pay some consequences for it, and the American people are rising up against that evil. It's a great thing to see.
Okay, so now we need to discuss the difference between civil society's consequences for bad speech, quote unquote cancel culture, in the low pixelation version of that argument, and the activity of government involvement with this. The government should not be involved in trying to force people to say certain things or do certain things with regard to speech. That is not a thing we want the government involved in. And I'm old enough to remember when a lot of conservatives thought that, when a lot of conservatives looked at, for example, the Joe Biden administration's attempts to push and cudgel Facebook into taking down particular types of content around COVID, and they said that's a violation of free speech principles, which it is. And the Supreme Court utterly failed on that question. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. There was a very robust appellate court decision saying that it was, in fact, a violation of the First Amendment for the federal government under Joe Biden to try and force Facebook and other social media sites to take content down. That was a violation of the First Amendment protections of freedom of speech. And then the Supreme Court found kind of shaky grounds for essentially avoiding that question entirely. Okay, with that said, the federal government should not be forcing people to embrace or not embrace certain types of speech in the private realm. That is not something the federal government should be doing. And so the question about what's going on with Jimmy Kimmel right now, because Jimmy Kimmel's show, last night it was announced, has essentially gone off the air. It has been canceled according to the Hollywood Reporter. It's suspended indefinitely. The question is whether that is a result of organic pressure from the crowd, which, if so, great. I'm on board. Jimmy Kimmel is a schmuck. Jimmy Kimmel is the worst. Jimmy Kimmel has been trashed for over 10 years. Jimmy Kimmel went from a funny guy who used to tell jokes, going all the way back to his days on K-Rock, 106.7 in Los Angeles. When I was in high school, I was listening to Kevin and Bean in the morning because my carpool mates refused to listen to anything else. And Jimmy Kimmel was the sports guy, and he was funny and obviously very talented. And then he somehow became a late night host. And after he became a late night host, he decided it became incumbent upon him to become, as my friend Guy Benson has said, the woke pope of late night TV, where he's just going to lecture you every night and be incredibly dickish all the time. And that was his shtick. He's going to go on TV and he's going to lecture you and be terrible. And there are 1,000 times that Jimmy Kimmel should have been canceled. 1,000 times where he said things that were so egregious and terrible and gross that he should have been done. And by the standards of the modern woke media, they should have just dug up his old stuff and gone after him. I mean, there's old tape from The Man Show with Adam Carolla of Jimmy Kimmel groping women without their permission or simulating groping women without their permission. I mean, this is from The Man. This is on Comedy Central back in the day.
Tell us what you think of the statue.
He's literally just going up to a woman and mimicking having sex with her from behind without her knowledge.
Take another look at it.
I mean, being obscene. That didn't get him canceled. Jimmy Kimmel dressed up in blackface back in the day. He dressed up as Karl Malone in blackface. That didn't get him canceled.
My whole thing is this. If there do have such a thing as retardation, Karl Malone don't want to be coming back to Earth as no chicken. Chicken got a dang deal going on here on Earth. Locked up in pan, getting fried up, barbecued, wings getting chopped off and dipped in delicious, tangy hot sauce. Karl Malone do love them hot wings.
Now, in the 90s, they were quite a time. But, I mean, forget about his old stuff, his old stuff. He didn't get canceled for saying that people should die in hospitals if they took ivermectin for COVID, which is a thing he actually said on the air. This captain of empathy.
Dr. Fauci said that if hospitals get any more overcrowded, they're going to have to make some very tough choices about who gets an ICU bed. That choice doesn't seem so tough to me. Vaccinated person having a heart attack? Yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo? Rest in peace, Wheezy.
And so, that's a thing he should have been canceled over. So don't get me wrong. I'm very happy to see Jimmy Kimmel go. Like, for whatever reason, I'm very happy to see him go. He was a horror show. His morality is completely backwards. His obvious dripping disdain and hatred for anyone who disagrees with him is perfectly clear. It is clear every night, has been clear every night for years. No one could more richly deserve being taken off the air than Jimmy Kimmel. The question is whether the federal government had to do with him being taken off the air. And this is where, again, policy cannot be a blunderbuss. It cannot be. See, Charlie Kirk was killed doing free speech. He was killed engaging in political debate. And one of the legacies that Charlie Kirk leaves is the necessity for such political debate, the necessity for free speech. And again, that doesn't mean speech without consequences. It means the necessity for debate. And what that requires, that the government not be involved, for example, in shutting down free debate. So the question with regard to Kimmel is whether this is an organic outgrowth of natural outrage over Jimmy Kimmel, or whether this was forced by the federal government. Alrighty, coming up, we'll get to more on Jimmy Kimmel. Was this government interventionism, or was it just, the public being pissed at Jimmy Kimmel? I mean, the guy is, as I will say 1,000 times the show, a schmuck. First, when was the last time you bragged about your wireless company? Like, did you know my wireless company gave away 1,000 American flags to deserving vets and forgave $10 million in veteran debt? Did you know my wireless company raised almost $500,000 to prevent veteran suicide? When your wireless company is Pure Talk, there's a whole lot to brag about. You can even brag about the coverage you get with Pure Talk, a 5G network that is insanely fast, dependable, and secure. And you can brag about how much money you save with Pure Talk. Unlimited talk, text, 15 gigs of high-speed data is just $35 a month with mobile hotspot. I'm always using Pure Talk because I'm always on my phone. Especially lately, I've relied heavily on the excellent tower network that Pure Talk provides, and of course, their price is great. It's time for you to switch to my wireless company, Pure Talk. But if you need another reason, something you can really brag about, Pure Talk is the only wireless company that gives you a 1-year free membership to Daily Wire Plus when you go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Again, choose a qualifying plan at puretalk.com/Shapiro and relish your free 1-year membership to Daily Wire Plus. Pure Talk, wireless, worth bragging about. Go check them out right now, puretalk.com/Shapiro to get started. Also, whether you're heading to the ranch or exploring the city, the right boots make the big difference. Tecovas crafts quality Western boots for everyone, from seasoned cowboys to first-time boot buyers, with over 200 meticulous steps that deliver broken-in comfort right out of the box. Because when adventure calls, you want to answer in trusty boots. As the leaves start changing colors, it is officially boot season. Let me tell you, as somebody who juggles work, family life, and everything in between, you actually do need a good pair of boots. Look at me. Do I look like a boots guy, like a cowboy boots guy? And yet, Tecovas are excellent, and I wear them. Whether I'm at the office, taking the family out for dinner, or just handling the chaos of weekend activities with the kids, boots are perfect. You can dress them up, you can dress them down. What really sets Tecovas apart is their craftsmanship. These heritage-made cowboy boots are handcrafted in over 200 steps in Leon, Mexico, from the first stitch to the final lemonwood peg. And here's the thing that tells me, again, they are comfortable right out of the box. They're not going to squeeze your feet, make you feel uncomfortable. They're great. And again, if I can wear them, anyone can wear them. Plus, with football season in full swing and all those weekend tailgates and games, Tecovas has some great new colors that are perfect for showing team spirit while keeping your feet comfortable from kickoff through overtime. They know that everyone deserves the perfect fit. Whatever your style, size, or need, they've got you covered. Right now, get 10% off at tecovas.com/Shapiro when you sign up for email and text. That's 10% off at tecovas.com/Shapiro, tecovas.com/Shapiro. See site for details. Tecovas, point your toes west. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Kimmel's late-night talk show is being suspended by ABC over his viral comments about Charlie Kirk. A network spokesperson said Wednesday that Jimmy Kimmel Live will be preempted indefinitely. The network's action came just after Nexstar, one of the biggest owners of local TV stations in the country, including 28 ABC affiliates, said it will preempt the series for the immediate future. A source said that ABC had also heard from at least one other station group about the show, suggesting an affiliate revolt may have played a role in the decision. The dramatic move also follows Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr threatening to take action against ABC affiliates in the wake of Kimmel suggesting the Kirk shooting suspect was a MAGA Republican during a monologue earlier this week. Supposedly, Kimmel was prepared to address the backlash on Wednesday night shows. He planned to explain what he said and demonstrate how it was taken out of context. It wasn't. So let's begin by playing the clip that effectively got Kimmel thrown off the air. Here is the original Kimmel tape.
We had some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. There's demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish.
So it wasn't the last part that got Kimmel suspended. It was the first part where he said that the shooter was one of their own. It was a MAGA person. Now, by the time that Kimmel broadcast this on Monday night, it was perfectly clear that was not true. Perfectly clear. I'd said it the week before. We all knew. Also, there was new evidence that it wasn't true. We talked about that evidence on Monday. All the evidence that showed that the shooter was, in fact, that the shooter murdered Charlie because the shooter was in a relationship, a gay relationship with a trans furry, and had decided that Charlie was hateful because Charlie said that men were not women and all the like. We knew that already. So, was Kimmel lying? I believe Kimmel was lying. I believe Kimmel knew. I also know that there are a bunch of delusional people on the left, truly delusional, who are trying to pretend away what happened by saying that either the shooter had no political motivations at all, which is totally crazy, or that the shooter was even MAGA, which is even crazier. So maybe in his own head, he was part of that delusional crew that thought that because the shooter grew up in a MAGA house, that meant that he was MAGA, despite the fact that, again, all evidence shows he was anything but, that he was a far leftist who believed that Charlie was, quote unquote, hateful for saying that men were not women, and was hateful because he disagreed with Charlie Kirk because, he was in love with another man pretending to be a woman dressing as a dog. I know, it's like a bad joke. It's really one of the worst jokes, even worse than some of the jokes that Jimmy Kimmel told. Okay, so the question is, and this is really the question, whether these local affiliates canceled Kimmel because they were upset with Kimmel, or whether they canceled Kimmel because they came under pressure from the FCC. So Nexstar ABC put out a statement, quote, Nexstar Media Group today announced that the company's owned and partner television stations affiliated with the ABC television network would preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live for the foreseeable future, beginning with tonight's show. Nexstar strongly objects to recent comments made by Mr. Kimmel concerning the killing of Charlie Kirk and will replace the show with other programming in its ABC-affiliated markets. Mr. Kimmel's comments about the death of Mr. Kirk are offensive and insensitive at a critical time in our national political discourse, and we do not believe they reflect the spectrum of opinions, views, or values of the local communities in which we are located, said Andrew Alford, president of Nexstar's broadcasting division. Continuing to give Mr. Kimmel a broadcast platform in the communities we serve is simply not in the public interest at the current time, and we have made the difficult decision to preempt his show in an effort to let cooler heads prevail as we move toward the resumption of respectful, constructive dialogue. Okay, now the question is, was that natural? Or was that a result of the fact that Nexstar is currently trying to push a $6.2 billion merger through FCC scrutiny? And the fact that the FCC chair, Brandon Carr, went on Benny Johnson's show where he effectively threatened action against Kimmel, ABC, and Disney.
They have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with it an obligation to operate in the public interest. And we can get into some ways that we've been trying to reinvigorate the public interest and some changes that we've seen. But frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. It appears to be clear that you could make a strong argument that this is sort of an intentional effort to mislead the American people about a very core fundamental fact, a very important matter. At the end of the day, if we do get called upon to cast a vote on this, Disney will have a chance to put in their arguments and explain it. But this is a very, very serious issue right now for Disney.
Okay, let me be clear about this. I like Brendan Carr. I do. The FCC should not be threatening action against ABC or its affiliates or Disney based on Jimmy Kimmel being a jackass. He's been a jackass his entire career. Social censure is perfectly appropriate. The blowback from the public, totally natural and in fact good, because Jimmy Kimmel is in fact a schmuck who should have been taken off the air 10 years ago. I do not want the FCC in the business of telling local affiliates that their licenses will be removed if they broadcast material that the FCC deems to be informationally false. Why? Because one day the shoe will be on the other foot. I know that we've gotten out of the habit of this. I know that there are a lot of people on the right who say the shoe will never be on the other foot. And if it is, the left will just do it anyway. Here is the thing. Preemptively breaking things because you believe that the left is going to break the things makes the things broken, and you can't unbreak the things. So I'm an advocate of the idea that things that are not yet broken probably should not be. And if we are now in a world where we're going to preemptively break the plate because we believe that the bad guy is going to break the plate, all the plates are going to get broken. And regardless of what you do, that's going to get used against you. The shards will be used as weapons against you. I promise you, if the FCC is removing local affiliate licenses or threatening to do so based on Jimmy Kimmel being a jackass, the next time a Democrat is elected, which will happen, this country is split 50-50. Pretending that this country is split 80-20 does no one any good. The Congress is split effectively 50-50. The Senate of the United States is split almost 50-50. It is split 53-47. The last presidential election, which President Trump won, he did not win in a blowout. I will remind you that Kamala Harris, an awful, terrible, horrifying candidate, somehow achieved in the popular vote 48.3%, and Donald Trump won 49.8%. And so we should stop pretending that this is not a closely divided country and that Democrats will never win again. First of all, just on principle, I do not think that the FCC should be involved in this sort of stuff. I think there's a better case that the FCC should not even be involved in granting broadcast licenses to local affiliates anymore. We now live in an age of digital and cable. I don't think that we need the FCC to regulate this sort of stuff this way in the first place. I'm for total deregulation. But if you are going to have regulations on the books, then they have to be evenly administered. And so again, I'm not saying Kimmel shouldn't be taken off the air. I'm not saying that social sanction shouldn't have forced him off the air. I'm not saying any of these local affiliates shouldn't have said they don't want to take Kimmel anymore. I'm saying they should have done all of that 10 years ago. And I'm not sure what happened here. If, best case scenario, the public forced the local affiliates to react and take Kimmel off the air, totally legit. I do not like that the FCC muddied the waters here. I think it is bad politics, and I think it is bad policy. The fact that the FCC is trying to use standards about broadcasting false information in this way, I think is a negative. Okay, according to FCC rules, the FCC prohibits broadcasting false information about a crime or catastrophe if the broadcaster knows the information is false and will cause substantial public harm if aired. That should be a relatively high bar because I'm just telling you, if Democrats win the presidency and you got a Democrat in charge of the FCC, you got Adam Schiff in charge of the FCC, you know which affiliates are going to get threatened? All of the Fox affiliates. You know that's going to happen. It will. If the rumors are true and CBS News is about to make a significant shift back toward the center and suddenly broadcast things conservatives are not against, if that is a true thing, you can bet dollars to donuts that under a Democrat president, suddenly CBS affiliates will come under fire. This is why we don't want the state involved in these things. And here's the problem. Brendan Carr, right, over at the FCC, he then put out a statement, quote, "I want to thank Nexstar for doing the right thing. Local broadcasters have an obligation to serve the public interest. While this may be an unprecedented decision, it is important for broadcasters to push back on Disney programming that they determine falls short of community values. I hope other broadcasters follow Nexstar's lead." Again, shoe on the other foot. If this were a Democrat at the FCC who were saying, "I want to thank Nexstar for canceling all affiliates of Fox thanks to something that Sean Hannity said, or that back in the day Tucker Carlson said on the air," would the right be okay with that? Or would they be claiming, quite properly, that that is massive regulatory overreach, unprecedented in scope? Already coming up, the President of the United States decides it's time to crack down on Antifa, plus Ta-Nehisi Coates. Yes, he's back from defending Hamas now. He's going to speak about the evils of political violence. It turns out that actually Charlie, his rhetoric, that was the big problem. First, when we started Daily Wire, it felt like we had to figure everything out with minimal help. You know, we had the editorial guidelines, studio setup, production schedule, branding. All that stuff was overwhelming. New decisions were needed daily. Finding one tool that simplifies everything when starting a business is a game changer and a lifesaver. For millions of business, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. We even use it for our own Daily Wire shop to make sure things are running smoothly and efficiently so you can get all the goods. So you might be asking, what if I can't design a website or I'm worried people haven't heard of my brand? Well, good news, Shopify's got you covered from the start. They've got beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand's style and help you find your customers through easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And if you need a hand with everyday tasks, their AI tools created specifically for commerce can help enhance product images, write descriptions, and more. Plus, their award-winning customer support is available 24/7 to share advice if you ever get stuck. Turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial. Start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro. Shopify.com/Shapiro. Also, what does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts, you'll get 10 different answers. The market is bullish one day, bearish the next. Interest rates climb or plummet. Inflation goes up, it goes down, all depending on who's making the forecast. In a world of endless predictions and conflicting signals, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could finally invent that crystal ball? Well, until that happens, over 43,000 businesses have future-proofed themselves with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 AI cloud ERP that seamlessly integrates accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one unified platform. This single source of truth delivers the visibility and control needed for rapid decision-making, while real-time insights and forecasting transform raw data into actionable intelligence about what lies ahead. When you're closing the books in days rather than weeks, you spend less time analyzing the past and more time preparing for the future. Whether your company generates millions or hundreds of millions in revenue, NetSuite empowers you to tackle immediate challenges while positioning you to capitalize on your biggest opportunities. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/Shapiro. That's netsuite.com/Shapiro. netsuite.com/Shapiro. President Trump thanked ABC for canceling Kimmel because he hates Jimmy Kimmel. Properly so. He should hate Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel's a schmuck. I can't say it enough. I think Jimmy Kimmel's despicable. The president put out a statement, great news for America. The ratings challenged Jimmy Kimmel show is canceled. Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. Kimmel has zero talent and worse ratings than even Colbert, if that's possible. That leaves Jimmy and Seth, 2 total losers on fake news NBC. Their ratings are also horrible. Do it, NBC. President Donald J. Trump. Now, again, if this is just President Trump cheering from the sidelines, agree on every part of that. Jimmy Kimmel is utterly untalented. The other hosts are terrible. They should go. They have terrible ratings. All of that's true. The federal government, the imprimatur of the federal government here, is a problem. It is not good. Brian Stelter reached out for comment, apparently, to Brendan Carr. He said, I asked FCC Chair Brendan Carr if he had any new comment now that ABC has pulled Jimmy Kimmel's show, and he sent a GIF, and the GIF is of Dwight Schrute and Michael Scott raising the roof from The Office. Like we did it. Why? Okay, like why? Just let the public be outraged and let the public outrage organically drive the thing. Why? Now you've muddied the waters in a serious way. Legally, you've muddied the waters on First Amendment grounds, on FCC overregulatory grounds, in much the same way that the Biden administration was threatening Facebook with consequences if they did not remove certain material. I mean, this is an open threat, actually. Like, now you've muddied the waters. And not only have you muddied the waters on Kimmel, you have now retroactively muddied the waters on Colbert. Because again, the claim the left was making, and the reason they're valorizing, again, one of the other terrible hosts on late night TV, Stephen Colbert, the reason they valorized him is because he got fired. He got fired because his ratings sucked, and he was totally underwater monetarily. His show was losing tens of millions of dollars every year. That's the real reason he was fired. But the left claimed that he was fired due to pressure from the administration. Because they are building a narrative now. And the narrative they are trying to build is that President Trump and his team are in authoritarian fashion destroying things like freedom of speech. And the case they're trying to build as a comeback from the horrible story of Charlie's death, a story that is terrible for the radical left, truly terrible, because the American people have reacted with unprecedented force and fury at what happened to Charlie. What the left is now going to attempt to do is jujitsu that reaction into the belief that the Trump administration is overreacting. When you have a moment to do the right thing, you have to be, as an administration, calculated and meticulous in how you pursue this stuff. I was talking to my friend Chris Rufo about this shortly after Charlie was shot. And we were talking about the fact that the administration, no one is more effective at this than Chris Rufo. And Chris was saying, and he said this publicly, obviously, you cannot afford to have blunders like the Attorney General Pam Bondi out there saying that hate speech needs to be regulated because that's uncalibrated. It doesn't get the job done. And not only that, it creates backlash. President Trump was elected in part based on the idea that he was going to maintain freedom of speech. He was elected in part based on the backlash to true cancel culture, the broadening of the Overton window, the opening of the speech aperture. That was a thing that President Trump was elected based on. And if you wish to hand power back to the Democrats, what you do here is you overreach, or at least even create the perception of overreach. So, two things can be true at once, as always. I'm very, very happy Jimmy Kimmel's off the air. For the 9th time, he is a putz, a schmuck, and a schmendrick. There's a lot of Yiddish on today's show. He's the worst. Can't stand Jimmy Kimmel. Can't stand him going back 10 years when he was trying to use the heart surgery of his son to argue for nationalized health care, pretending that it gave him some sort of new expertise into the healthcare system. I made the point on my show. My daughter had open heart surgery that same year from the same surgeon, and that had no impact on my healthcare views because one thing has nothing to do with the other. Jimmy Kimmel's awful. Happy to see him go. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. The government should not be doing this thing. They should not be muddying the waters. And if they do, then they put themselves at risk of significant overreach. Now, meanwhile, we have new details that have emerged about the shooter in this case. According to the UK Daily Mail, a sickening cache of searches have been revealed about the suspect. He was involved in a furry shades of gay game. Well, I can't imagine why he would have shot Charlie then. One of the things that I find absolutely amusing about many of the members of the left when it comes to this is they'll say, well, you know, it wasn't a political issue, it was a personal issue. It was personal because, you see, this guy was a gay furry. He was a gay furry in love with a trans gay furry. And that means that it was about his personal proclivities. It wasn't political. It was the left that originally contended the personal is political. In this case, the personal is political. It is. Read the texts. Go look at what he was saying, what he was telling friends and family. He believed that his gay furry lifestyle was under threat from people like Charlie Kirk, who were intolerant of the insanity of the trans ideology. And then he shot Charlie. It is no surprise at all to find that this person was not, contrary to the popular opinion of the left apparently, a Romeo and Juliet character in a gay romance, that actually he was a sexual sicko. None of that is particularly shocking, obviously. It is, frankly, absolutely predictable. Apparently, he used a pseudonym on Steam where he played a pornographic online game called Furry Shades of Gay, according to the UK Daily Mail. Apparently, he also followed artists who drew explicit cartoons associated with pedophilia. The Daily Mail cited Tyler Robinson's friends to report that he used the account name Crafton247 on his gaming and online accounts. The 22-year-old reportedly played Furry Shades of Gay, a game that has described itself as being about love, queer relationships, hot gay and slapstick humor on Steam in 2020. And apparently this appeared on a furry site, furaffinity.com, a website for people with a proclivity for humanoid animal illustrations and dressing up in fursuits. I can't imagine, by the way, the media were trying to say that his parents were intolerant and terrible. I can't imagine why they might have objected to their son becoming a weird freak. I can't imagine why. And I say that advisedly. Yes, if you are visiting Furry Shades of Gay, you are, in fact, a weird freak. Ain't nothing I can do about it. That's a you problem, my friend. And blaming society for your ills and then shooting people based on those ills does not make you a romantic character. It just underscores the politics associated with sick freakdom. It is, insane that the left has attempted to craft these permission structures. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the egregiously horrible writer. I mean, I'm always amazed at how people can pretend that the Ta-Nehisi Coates is somehow a great writer. Truly, it is an amazing thing. You have to be incapable of reading to believe that Ta-Nehisi Coates is a great writer. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a joke. He doesn't know how to think. He's a purple writer who will use 3 adjectives where 0 would do. He's overwrought. He's hysterical. And he hates the country. I mean, truly hates America. Ta-Nehisi Coates. And Western civilization more broadly. He has an entire piece over at Vanity Fair, basically blaming Charlie for his own murder. Quote, Kirk subscribed to some of the most disreputable and harmful beliefs that this country has ever known. And Charlie Kirk, about as normie a Republican as you can find. But it is still chilling to think that those beliefs would be silenced by a gunshot. The tragedy is personal. Kirk was robbed of his life, and his children and family will forever live with the knowledge that a visual record of that robbery is just an internet search away. And the tragedy is national. Political violence ends conversation and invites war. Its rejection is paramount to a functioning democracy and a free society. You know, I love hearing this from Ta-Nehisi Coates, who literally said that he watched 9/11 happen while stoned on the roof of an apartment building and didn't feel anything. A person whose last book was all about the wonders, effectively, of Palestinian terrorism. He never even mentions in a book about Israel and the Palestinians terrorism, not once, because the entire book is a tacit justification for Palestinian murder and terrorism. He's very angry at Ezra Klein of the New York Times. I did an interview with Ezra a couple of weeks ago before Charlie's shooting. It finally aired earlier this week. It was a very cordial conversation. I've had many cordial conversations with Ezra, as I've had cordial conversations with many people with whom I disagree on the left. And many of those people were texting me and calling me to find out not only if I was okay, obviously I am, thank God, but also to express their horror, shock, dismay at what happened to Charlie. This is not a complete right-left thing, meaning there are radical leftists who endorse political violence and then tacitly endorse the thought structures that lead to it. Ta-Nehisi Coates does that. He is part of the permission structure for violence, Ta-Nehisi Coates. And then there are people who are on the rational side of the left. They disagree with me on a lot of issues, but also they understand that these permission structures for violence are bad and wrong. And I got a call from, 24 of them over the course of the last week, including Ezra Klein. So Ezra wrote a piece in which he lamented the death of Charlie Kirk and said basically he was engaged in normie political conversation, which is true. And normie political conversation is fraught. And one of the games we can always play when any political commentator dies or is killed, you can always play this game, is go find bad old tweets. Go find a statement that if you take it out of context looks really, really bad, and then pretend that that person is that statement. You can play that game all day long, and it's the world's dumbest game, truly the dumbest game. But Ta-Nehisi Coates is angry at Ezra Klein. He's enraged at Ezra Klein for having the temerity to suggest that Charlie's murder was really, really bad and that Charlie himself was not, in fact, an extremist, because Charlie was, in fact, not an extremist. So here's what Ta-Nehisi Coates writes. Political violence is a virtue, Klein noted. This assertion is true. It is also at odds with Kirk's own words. Absolute nonsense. Charlie never called for political violence, not once. That's insane. It's not merely that Kirk, as Klein put it, defended the Second Amendment. It's that Kirk endorsed hurting people to advance his preferred policy outcomes. Okay, there is not a single time that Charlie Kirk suggested, quote unquote, hurting people, using violence in order to achieve a political outcome. It is only Ta-Nehisi Coates who, in his tacit and not so tacit endorsement of terrorism, has done so repeatedly. So what does he say? Quote, what are we to make of a man who called for the execution of the American president and then was executed himself? What in the world? What in the world? What he said about Joe Biden is that Joe Biden was a tyrant and should be put in prison and or given the death penalty. That is not calling for the murder of Joe Biden. I disagree with that. I think it's overwrought. But the notion that that is a call for overt political violence, I mean, that's a thing that Democrats say routinely about President Trump, all the while calling him Hitler, by the way. But here's what Ta-Nehisi Coates, again, just one of the true garbage bags in the literature industry, and also given control of comic books for DC, which just shows you how far the left the culture is. What are we to make of an NFL that on one hand encourages us to end racism and on the other urges us to commemorate an unreconstructed white supremacist? Ta-Nehisi Coates, an unreconstructed white supremacist? Charlie Kirk literally fought off the Nick Fuentes white supremacists. That's why they hated him. And what of the writers, the thinkers, and the pundits who cannot separate the great crime of Kirk's death from the malignancy of his public life? Can they truly be so ignorant to the words of a man they have rushed to memorialize? I don't know. But the most telling detail in Klein's column was that, for all his praise, there was not a single word in the piece from Kirk himself. Well, I mean, I could fill literally entire books with Charlie's normie political commentary. We all could, because it was pretty normie. Again, for the left, the desire to treat Charlie as an other, who therefore was somehow responsible for his own death, that temptation is so strong because they have to project. They have to. With the left, every accusation is in fact an admission. Every accusation is truly an attempt to externalize a problem with themselves. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a writer who has spent years creating permission structures for violence. But he's angry at Charlie after Charlie is murdered. Meanwhile, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, he continues somehow to pretend that the burning of the gubernatorial mansion in Pennsylvania with him and his family inside, that somehow that was the result of right-wing political violence? My dude, you got nearly burned to death by a pro-Palestine activist. And let us be clear where those reside. They reside on the political left. And here's Josh Shapiro being truly, truly unintelligent.
Unfortunately, some, from the dark corners of the internet all the way to the Oval Office, want to cherry pick which instances of political violence they want to condemn. Listen, doing that only further divides us, and it makes it harder to heal. Violence is never the answer, and we cannot allow violence to be used as a pretext for more violence.
And it's hey, how about more vagary? How about more, meaningless blather? How about that? Just more gibbering and jabbering. Already coming up, Barack Obama signs into chat just what America needed. First, I'm sure most of us think home security means waiting for something bad to happen. An alarm shrieking after someone had already broken in, hoping it would scare them off or maybe alert a neighbor. But here is the thing. Once the intruder is inside, the damage is largely done. Your sense of security, that fundamental feeling of safety in your own space, has been violated. Real protection isn't about responding to a crime. It's about preventing one from happening in the first place. That's exactly why I've partnered with SimpliSafe, a system built around the idea that the best security is proactive and not reactive. Here's how it works. SimpliSafe uses smart AI-powered cameras to identify threats lurking outside your home and immediately alert their professional monitoring agents. These agents intervene in real time before the break-in even begins. They access two-way audio to confront the person, trigger sirens and spotlights to scare them off, and request rapid police dispatch when needed, all helping to stop the intruder while they're still outside. That's real security. I've joined the more than 4 million Americans who trust SimpliSafe with their home security every day. With a 60-day money-back guarantee, no long-term contract, SimpliSafe earns your business by keeping you safe and satisfied every day. Here at the office, we don't just have people that I care about. We also have, equipment and stuff. And we have to make sure it's protected, which is why we rely on SimpliSafe. Visit SimpliSafe.com/Shapiro. Claim 50% off a new system. That's SimpliSafe.com/Shapiro. There's no save like SimpliSafe. Also, if you've been living on credit cards just to cover groceries, gas, bills, interest rates on credit cards are insane. Why would you keep paying 20% or more to the bank when you could call my friends over at American Financing? They have mortgage rates in the 5s now. They are showing people every day how to keep more of your hard-earned money in your pocket and out of the hands of those credit card companies. Right now, American Financing is helping homeowners save an average of $800 a month by using their home equity to wipe out high-interest debt with no upfront fees and no obligation, just a 10-minute call to a salary-based mortgage consultant. Here's the kicker. If you start today, you could delay 2 mortgage payments. That puts even more cash in your hands right away when you need it. Don't wait. Call American Financing now. 866-574-2500. That's 866-574-2500. Or check them out at americanfinancing.net/Shapiro. Again, I know there are a lot of people out there. They've racked up the debt. They've got those credit cards to pay off. Why not work with my friends at American Financing to come up with an alternative solution that's going to help you now and down the road? Give them a call, 866-574-2500. That's 866-574-2500. Okay, so Barack Obama has decided to weigh in, which is just what America needed. We needed Barack Obama, who truly was an unbelievably polarizing figure. I know that the left has this vision that Barack Obama was a unifier. He was not. He ran as a unifier in 2008, and then he lied. It is one of the signal sins of our political history that Barack Obama, who was elected to unify America. No red America, no blue America, just Americans. No black Americans, no white Americans, just Americans. You remember it. I remember it because I am older than 5 moments old. And then he proceeded to polarize America by governing hard left and attributing the backlash to his far left governance to Americans' deep history of deep-seated racism. Well, yesterday, he was doing another obnoxious interview in which he says that we are at an inflection point with regard to political violence. I mean, I wonder how we got to this inflection point. How could we have done it? I mean, sure, it might have been that time that you effectively justified rioting in Ferguson. It could have been that. Or maybe it was that time, as we will get to, where you basically blamed the police for their own murders in Dallas. Maybe it could have been, but no, he was just too genteel. He was too genteel. Here's Barack Obama. Again, a man who considers himself holier than the Pope. Here we go.
We are certainly at an inflection point, not just around political violence, but there are a host of larger trends that we have to be concerned about. I think it is important for us at the outset to acknowledge that political violence is not new. It has happened at certain periods in our history.
Well, thank you for that. He continued by saying, he disagreed with Charlie Kirk on everything, but he wasn't empowering extreme. And then he blamed Trump, of course. It's always about Trump. You see, he had nothing to do with the election of Donald Trump. I mean, sure, it was a direct backlash to Barack Obama, but it had nothing to do with him, obviously. He's just an observer, a passive observer in America's national history.
When it happens to some, but even if you think they're quote unquote on the other side of the argument, that's a threat to all of us. And we have to be clear and forthright in condemning it. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have a debate about the ideas that people who were victims of political violence were promoting. And so I've noticed that there's been some confusion, I think, around this lately. And frankly, coming from the White House and some of the other positions of authority that suggest, even before we had determined who the perpetrator of this evil act was, that somehow we're going to identify an enemy. We're going to suggest that somehow that enemy was at fault, and we are then going to use that as a rationale for trying to silence discussion around who we are as a country and what direction we should go.
So here's the thing. When Barack Obama does this, remember, this ties back into that FCC discussion we were having earlier. This right here is the narrative the left wants to retail. The narrative the left wants to retail is that Charlie Kirk's shooting is not about Charlie Kirk's shooting, and it's not about the left. It's not about the left's ties with political violence. It's not about the groups that support those political acts of violence. It is not about that. It's about the backlash to free speech. Right? So that is one of the reasons I'm objecting to muddying the waters with the kinds of stuff that we are seeing with regard to the FCC. Just going to note that by way of explaining. Here's President Obama continuing.
Obviously, I didn't know Charlie Kirk. I was generally aware of some of his ideas. I think those ideas were wrong. But that doesn't negate the fact that what happened was a tragedy and that I mourn for him and his family. He's a young man with 2 small children and a wife who obviously, and a huge number of friends and supporters who cared about him. And so we have to extend grace to people during their period of mourning and shock. We can also, at the same time, say that I disagree with the idea that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a mistake.
Okay, so he's extending grace to Charlie. Charlie gets shot, and he's not talking about the left-wing ideologue who shot him. He's not talking about the movement that created the impetus for violence. He is extending grace to Charlie. Don't worry, this is Captain Anti-Polarization. He's extending his grace to Charlie because Charlie got shot. Well, isn't that nice of him? Isn't that generous of him? What a self-centered. There we go.
That's not me politicizing the issue. It's making an observation about who are we as a country. I can say that I disagree with the suggestion that my wife or Justice Jackson does not have adequate brain processing power. I can
Okay, pause it for a second. Okay, if you actually go back to what Charlie said about the quote-unquote brain processing power, I want to read you the direct quote. If we would have said 3 weeks ago that Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called racist. But now they're coming out and they're saying it for us. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously. Okay, so his argument there is, if you say that someone required affirmative action, that is a tacit admission the person does not have the processing power that would have let them in just based purely on merit. That was Charlie's argument. But again, the idea that Obama is putting forth here is that Charlie was a racist. That is what he is trying to retail here.
We have to recognize that on both sides, undoubtedly, there are people who are extremists and who say things that are contrary to what I believe are America's core values. But I will say that those extreme views were not in my White House. I wasn't embracing them. I wasn't empowering them. I wasn't putting the weight of the United States government behind extremist views. And that is when we have the weight of the United States government behind extremist views, we've got a problem.
So it's Trump's fault, because in his White House, they never emboldened extremist views, ever. I mean, that's something, he never emboldened extremist views. So really, it's the people who embolden the extremist views. So eventually he does get to the permission structures for violence, but then he basically says it's coming from President Trump. I will note at this point that Barack Obama labeled his political opponents enemies effectively all the time. It happened all the time. He literally had a man helping to run his national security agency, Ben Rhodes, a national security advisor, who was nicknamed Hamas. Barack Obama is a person who retailed the suggestion that opposition to gay marriage was in and of itself bigotry and evil. Barack Obama used the occasion of people being shot in order to promote the agenda of the shooters. And here was Barack Obama's speech with regard to a Ferguson grand jury decision over Michael Brown. I'll never forget this one. Michael Brown was a criminal who robbed a convenience store. And then, when Michael Brown was confronted by a police officer, he reached into the police officer's car, discharged the police officer's gun, tried to run away, and then turned around and charged at the police officer. A series of lies were then told about the police officer. The suggestion was made that he had shot Michael Brown in the back in cold blood. That's where the whole hands up, don't shoot routine came from the political left. It was all a pack of lies. Every single bit of it was a lie. And then, after a grand jury decided not to indict based on actual evidence, the president of the United States got up and said that actually none of it was a lie. People don't just make things up like this while the rioting was happening. But don't worry, he never emboldened extremism, Barack Obama.
What is also true is that there are still problems, and communities of color aren't just making these problems up. Separating that from this particular decision, there are issues in which the law too often feels as if it is being applied in a discriminatory fashion.
By the way, like the city was burning at this time. So that's a justification of the rioters. That's what that was. He would say, no, I'm against rioting. It's really bad. But the rioters do have a point. You do have to acknowledge their concerns. Here's Barack Obama's speech after the murder. This is actually at a memorial service for slain Dallas police officers who were shot by a Black Lives Matter activist. Here is Barack Obama basically ripping on the officers.
And while some suffer far more under racism's burden, some feel to a far greater extent discrimination's sting. Although most of us do our best to guard against it and teach our children better, None of us is entirely innocent. No institution is entirely immune. And that includes our police departments. We know this.
Just amazing. Just amazing. But don't worry, he never elevated extremism. Again, this is why I say it's not enough to say political violence is bad. We all understand political violence is bad. Okay, or we should. But saying that is the equivalent of just saying violence is bad. It's a childish sentiment. It's a childish but true sentiment, but it doesn't actually do anything. What you actually need to do is call out the permission structures that enable this violence. The permission structures, the ideologies that foment this violence. And if you forward those ideologies while simultaneously claiming to be against political violence, I don't really believe you. I'm sorry, I don't. Meanwhile, President Trump has announced that he is going to target Antifa. He calls it a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster as a major terrorist organization. I will also be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, Antifa is a very loosely agglomerated group. It involves a bunch of people who sort of cobbled together. It's not like a rigid top-down hierarchy, but using law enforcement resources to go after Antifa groups is definitely worthwhile because it is an inherently violent organization, without a doubt. It is worth noting it this way, by the way, that Antifa is trying to actually facilitate, according to their own documents, they're trying to facilitate conflict on the right in order to distract from their own actions on the left. Quote, one possibly useful wedge issue in this context is Israel. Conspiracy theorists have already jumped to blame Kirk's assassination on Mossad, claiming the lifelong Zionist was on the verge of becoming J-pilled. That's Antifa saying it. So, yeah, probably you should believe the people who were associated in a loose way, at the very least, with the shooter. Probably that seems like a good thing to do, is probably do their work for them ideologically. Now, that's a smart move. Meanwhile, the president of the United States is making moves to stop so-called debanking. Debanking is when a bank decides that you're outside their ideological predilections and they are therefore not going to allow you to have a bank account. And again, just like cancel culture, debanking has been applied to an enormous number of people who are just sort of mainstream. According to the Wall Street Journal, banks are now in the crosshairs. Many MAGA Republicans, Christian conservatives, and cryptocurrency libertarians say America's banks are shutting down the personal and business accounts of people whose politics they don't agree with, or are unfairly refusing to work with certain industries, such as gun manufacturers or coal companies. The Alliance Defending Freedom is bringing these tales to Congress, and the Trump administration is acting. In August, the president issued an executive order demanding an investigation into politicized or unlawful debankings. That is a positive thing the Trump administration is doing as well. Meanwhile, an immigration judge has now ruled that Mahmoud Khalil, the pro-terrorist activist with the green card, should be deported to Syria or Algeria because, as it turns out, he did not disclose certain information on his green card application, including that he worked for the UNRWA, which is in fact just a wing of Hamas. The UN Refugee Works Agency has been dedicated to the Palestinian cause since effectively 1949. And the UNRWA is just a tool of Hamas. And he didn't put that on his documents when he entered the country. So, yeah, I mean, that seems like a good reason to get rid of him. We never should have been let in the country in the first place. In a letter to the New Jersey federal judge, Khalil's lawyer said they have 30 days from September 12th to appeal her decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Apparently, the appeal court almost never grants stays of removal to non-citizens. So it is very likely that Khalil is in fact going to be deported, which would be a net benefit to the country. We do not need people like Mahmoud Khalil, one of the leaders of the Columbia University pro-terror protest movement, which engaged in criminal activity. We don't need that guy in the country. Well, bye. Meanwhile, in economic news, the Fed cut the interest rates by a quarter point and signaled that more cuts are likely yesterday. Here was Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve.
There wasn't widespread support at all for a 50 basis point cut today. You know, I think we've done very large rate hikes and very large rate cuts in the last 5 years, and you tend to do those at a time when you feel that policy is out of place and needs to move quickly to a new place. That's not at all what I feel certainly now. I feel like our policy has been doing the right thing so far this year. I think we were right to wait and see how tariffs and inflation and the labor market evolved. I think we're now reacting to the much lower level of job creation and other evidence of softening in the labor market and saying, well, those risks are maybe not fully balanced, but moving in the direction of balance now. And so that warrants a change in policy.
Okay, so, again, the markets kind of roiled at this. They didn't jump on this news. I think President Trump was expecting the markets to jump on the news. They really didn't. The reason being that Powell is acknowledging a slowing jobs market, and that is the reason why he is having to lower the interest rates. So he's not doing it because the job markets are robust and inflation is coming down. He's doing it because inflation is coming down and the job markets are, in fact, not robust. And so the markets are reading that. The Wall Street Journal points out that President Trump now has control of the interest rates. He's got the Federal Reserve policy he wants. And so whatever comes next, it is very difficult to blame on Joe Biden. Quote, in their summary of economic projections released after this week's meeting, Fed officials anticipate 2 more 25-point rate cuts this year and another in 2026. Yet the same SEP projections concede that inflation is proving more persistent than anticipated. They now expect personal consumption expenditure inflation to hit 2.6% next year. That's up from 2.4% predicted in June. They don't actually expect to hit the rate of 2% until 2028. So even though inflation is still 50% higher, 40% higher than it should be, they're afraid that the economy is slowing significantly. As the Wall Street Journal points out, Powell struggled to articulate how monetary policy might make a difference. Neither of the negatives he mentioned, tariffs and President Trump's immigration crackdown, can be offset by lowering interest rates. Otherwise, he said, it's not a bad economy. Booming stock valuations and investor enthusiasm for low-quality debt, among other symptoms, suggest financial conditions aren't especially tight as it is. They're making the point, basically, that the underlying factors in the economy that are weak are not going to be cured by cutting the interest rates. I think that is largely true. I think what you are likely to see is more of a bubble on the tech side. If that bubble bursts, it will be a worse downside. And if you really want a booming economy, you should hope that the Supreme Court strikes down President Trump's tariffs. It really is that simple at this point. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for our members right now. We're going to get into more of the Epstein debate. What is the evidence show? Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.